Good afternoon. I'm Dina Ladd, the Executive Director of the Missouri Cures Education Foundation. Our mission is to promote and protect medical research in the state of Missouri. I'm so excited to have such a great turnout today. I think some of you might have joined us the last 2 days for our other discussions. I'd like to ask you if you're comfortable to take a selfie of yourself and let us know where you're participating from. We have people all around the state and all around the country who are registered. There's going to be an email address in the chat box where you can mail your selfie, and we will be putting those on our website under our 2020 WISER events. 7 years ago, we started the Women in Science, Entrepreneurship and Research Initiative. We now hold WISER events all around the state. We also have expanded our presence with our podcast, WISER Conversations, and we have a Facebook group page that we'd love for you to join. This week is WISER Week, St. Louis WISER Week, and we've been discussing professional development. On Tuesday, we discussed mentorship. Yesterday was marketing your talents. And if you weren't able to join us, you can find those videos on our website, missouricures.org, or on our Facebook page. And today we are focused on finding your voice, communication and negotiation skills. This has been a crazy year, as we all know, and I am extremely appreciative of our generous sponsors who are sponsoring WISER. Our gold sponsors include Benson Hill, WISER, the Steinberg Family Foundation. Silver sponsors, Mid-America Transplant, Washington University, SLU Research, Pharma, and the St. Louis Community College Plant and Life Sciences. Our bronze sponsors, Cortex, BDO, Commerce Bank, SM Wilson, and BioSTL. And our media sponsors are Fox 2, KPLR, and Town and Style. So thank you all so much for being so generous and sponsoring WISER Week. Today, we have a fantastic group of women who will be discussing communication and negotiation skills. During our discussion, please feel free to submit questions in the chat box, and I hope at the end we can get to all of your questions. So let's start this discussion. I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Randy Foraker. She's the Director, Center for Population Health Informatics at Washington University. Natalie Self, the Executive Director for STEM STL. Mary Jo Gorman, CEO, Healthy Bites. And Amanda McLaren, Head of Digital Transformation, Crop Science, R&D, IT from Bayer. So welcome, ladies.
Hi.
And I'm going to ask all of you to unmute yourself.
Thanks for having us, Dina.
Thank you. All right. So our first question, and I'd love all of you to chime in on this one. We all have a voice, but whether we use it in the workplace is another story. How do you create or maximize opportunities to be heard? Mary Jo?
Well, I always think it's important to have the meeting before the meeting. So if you're going to a meeting, talking to your colleagues and finding out maybe if they have the same point of view that you do, and if they would be willing to speak up on a topic that is important to you. And that way you can get your ideas amplified and you can create more conversation around what it is that you think is important.
That's great. Great advice. Randy?
Yes, that is great advice. My advice in terms of creating an opportunity to really have your voice be heard, particularly in the setting of a meeting, is to get yourself added to the agenda. So if you feel that you're an expert on a given topic that is going to be discussed, or on a topic that came up at the previous meeting, and you want to remind people of the importance of that and your potential role in perhaps solving that problem or finding a solution, if you can get on the agenda, then you know that that topic is going to be discussed and you'll be seen as the expert in the room on that particular topic.
I think we're all in agreement there. I see a lot of heads shaking up and down on that one. Natalie?
Plus 100 to all of those things. And the theme here is going to be being prepared.
and doing work ahead of time, right? The meeting isn't just what happens in the meeting. And at first I thought this was cheating, but I've learned that white dudes do this too. So ladies, like, we need to lean into this. So something else that I do before the meeting is I research who's going to be there. So you can see on calendar invites, like, who at least is invited. You don't know who's going to show up, and do a little research and figure out what is your value add, what makes you different from other folks that are coming, and then think about how that might impact what you're sharing. So for me in the bioscience space, frankly, a lot of the times what's different is that I'm a Black woman, and I'm a social worker by training. And so I just know to go into the meeting through those lenses.
Great advice. And Amanda.
Well, it's hard to add to all of the great advice that we've already heard. I would say that maybe, especially in a corporate setting where there can be a few more layers of leadership and hierarchy that you may have to navigate, to really think broader than just the meeting or the setting that you're in, and try to identify and make that structure work for you. So think about the advocates or the champions, some of those sponsors that you may need to have throughout the organization, and really connect with them and work your network. Have them be your eyes and ears in other settings, be advocating for your point of view, and really be providing you with more context about what's going on in the environment that can really help you navigate in any setting more successfully.
What I love about this panel, we've got academia, we've got corporate, we've got entrepreneur, we've got bioscience, nonprofit. It's just a great mix. So thank you all. So what advice do you give women you're mentoring on negotiation? Mary Jo?
Well, to follow up on Natalie's point about being prepared, that's really important. It's important to pay attention to when your annual reviews are, because the expectation from the organization is that you will advocate for yourself. So that feels kind of natural to the people in the organization. And I'm a big fan of reading books about things and things about whether it's leadership or negotiation. And there's two really good books by Linda Babcock. One is called Women Don't Ask, and the other is called Ask for It. So the first one talks about why women don't ask, which is a lot of social expectation. And then the second one really helps you figure out, how do I do the ask in a way that's going to work for me?
I love it. And as we talk about books or podcasts, we will try to get that in the chat box for everyone so they can see that information. So as women, we must advocate for ourselves in our career or when it comes to opportunities and salary. We know that negotiation is important, but can be difficult for women. So how can women be competitive, but at the same time stay genuine? Randy?
Well, I struggled with this particularly early on in my career, understanding what my worth is and what value add I brought to my organization. And so what I found to be helpful was to create an objective list of how I've added value beyond expectations in whatever position that I was in. And what that demonstrates to me and really validated within myself was that I had done the work that was required to negotiate for that promotion. And as Mary Jo indicated, to ask. And that way you don't question whether or not you've earned it, because you know that you have, and you've justified that to yourself. And the next step is to communicate that value add to your boss or superior, whoever's making the decision about your promotion and advancement.
That's great. Mary Jo?
Well, this also comes back to being prepared and making sure you understand, what the marketplace is, which now with different websites, it's really easy to get some idea, at least, of where your salary expectations are. And I think that Randy's idea is a great one. I always keep a running list every year of what my goals are and what I've achieved. And so, because you lose track, I think everybody on this call is probably a doer. So you're moving on to the next thing and the next thing. And so keeping track of what you've really done so you can have those conversations makes a big difference too.
Yeah. Well, I see that we have quite a few people that have recently joined us. I'm going to do another intro because we always get that question in the chat box. So we have an amazing panel today discussing negotiation and communication skills. Randy Foraker, Director, Center for Population Health Informatics from Washington University. Natalie Self, Executive Director for STEM STL. Mary Jo Gorman, CEO, Healthy Bites, and Amanda McLaren, Head of Digital Transformation, Crop Science, R&D, IT at Bayer. And I'll just say that please put your questions in the chat box, because at the end of the discussion, we're going to try to get to as many as possible. Okay. So the art of negotiation comes into play in our daily life, but it's really critical for career advancement. We know we are not going to get what we want unless we ask. So before negotiating, we should all do our research, a landscape survey. What is the current market value for a particular job? Critically evaluate yourself. What is the range you're willing to work in? And what are you willing to walk away from? So what is your advice for negotiating in different situations? Natalie?
The biggest thing that feels silly and is really important is to practice. Practice in front of the mirror, practice with your cat, practice with a 4-year-old, because they will make sure that you have to negotiate. And just, you need to be confident. Like, even if you haven't yet learned to believe the things that, like Randy and Mary Jo said about like really believing that you're worth it, fake it till you make it. Everyone else is. So I would say practice. The other thing is to anticipate every reason they may say no, or they may come back to you, and then have a counterpoint for that. Part of this is like what we spoke about before, understanding limitations. So in the nonprofit world, or the academic world, if your role is grant funded, like know that. Know if there's a set budget, and just understand all of that. But doing your homework ahead of time is really, really important.
Yeah, that's great advice, Natalie. Mary Jo.
Well, I think people underestimate that the other side is expecting you to ask. And so my niece had a great experience. She got her first job. It was actually more than she thought she was going to make first out of college. And when she told me, I said, well, do you have to still ask for more? And she was really worried about that if she asked for more, that they would turn her down for the job, or think that reflected badly on her. So we kind of talked through, how do you do that? And then when she asked for more, she got a significant improvement from what they had first offered. And once she was in the job, she realized how much work people do to find the right person. And so once you do that, whether you're in your job and you're looking for a promotion or that sort of thing, the other side is expecting you to ask. So it's not a complete surprise. So you should be maybe less shy about it than you might otherwise be.
Yeah. And I love that advice. And Natalie, you were talking about practice and so forth. And as we're talking about communication skills and so forth, I don't know if any of you have ever gone through like a media training or worked with someone to teach you public speaking skills. I know years ago I worked with a media trainer, and I just remember as they drilled it in our head, go back to the box. What's the point? But have any of you had experience in those areas that you found beneficial?
I learned mostly by noticing what is ineffective, and not doing that. And that's a little bit of a personal style thing. So that may not be the best idea. And like Mary Jo just said, when you're on the other side of it and you are trying to find talent and you've been through that process, then you know what it's like to be on the other side of negotiation. So you can then better negotiate with someone else later down the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think that no matter how prepared you are, sometimes things take a left turn while you're in the conversation. There's something you didn't anticipate, something that takes you by surprise. So sort of be ready to say, oh, that's a really good point, or that's interesting. I need to think about that some more. But don't leave the meeting without what's the next follow-up step. So because sometimes that's what they're sort of hoping for. They threw you off balance. They're hoping you don't come back again. So make sure you just kind of stay with what your goal is, as Dina said, and just get yourself a chance to regroup.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. So many times we disagree, or we want to take a stand in a meeting, but hesitate at the last minute, especially when the political stakes are high. So what factors do you consider when deciding whether or not to say something in those types of situations? Amanda?
So full disclosure here on my response. I am the type of person that usually has to judge whether it's time to stop talking or not. So my inclination is always to offer an opinion, and typically what I try and do is really be as objective as possible, and focus on the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. And if I'm well intentioned and I'm trying to get to the business result, then I'm gonna focus there, not on the personal feelings or that kind of dynamic. So really make it about what's the least emotional, most objective thing that you're trying to get out of the conversation, and take that emotional piece out of it. And over the course of my career, I've found that often a well-timed, thoughtful question does more to get you where you wanted to be than having to challenge something openly. So those really great questions can be very, very effective in steering the conversation where you want to go.
Yeah, that's great. Natalie?
I'm always making sure that I'm adding value. And so when folks see that I'm about to speak up, which like Amanda, I'm often more on the more loquacious side of the equation. When I hope that when people see me about to speak, that they have gotten trained to understand that something new is coming, and is hopefully of value, and thus are more inclined to listen. And given that, as women in sciences, there aren't always a whole lot of us, my guess is that we're always going to have something new and helpful to say. And so you just got to kind of do it a couple times. And you realize that like the world isn't going to end. And particularly on Zoom, like no one's going to yell at you. And you just keep going.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Mary Jo?
Well, I think I'm similar to the earlier comments that I always think I have something to add, which maybe not the whole room agrees with. And so I do try to evaluate, is the point I'm making, how important really is it? I mean, is this something so important that I need to make the comment? Is there somebody else earlier in the meeting who maybe had this similar idea and maybe they need amplifying to try to get the point across if I think it's really important? And then I agree with Natalie. You just have to jump in a few times and realize it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And do you think that, and I think Natalie, you hit on this, if you're, and I think we've all been in this situation where we're perhaps sitting around the table and it's all guys and it's, you're the only woman. So how do you overcome that? I don't want to say, but sometimes you're a little more hesitant. So what can you do to overcome that feeling?
I mean, I'll tell a story. So I, as a former and current technical staff at BioSTL, we have the BioSTL Coalition. Mary Jo is involved, and these are not just a number of men, like Dina also is on the coalition. So, right. So not just a number of men, it's a number of folks who are really senior in their careers. And so I diverge from almost everyone on the coalition in some way, shape, or form. And so the first couple of times we were talking about issues that were really important to me, that I had some expertise about, that I really felt like I could add, and hopefully Mary Jo and Dina would agree. I was standing in my office and I was literally shaking, and I'm not someone who gets scared, but I just noticed that was happening, and I wrote down my point next to me. I said it and I was done, and then we moved on to someone else. And then I realized the next time I did it, I shook a little bit less, and the next time I did it, I sweated a little bit less. And so it really is about just jumping in. I think another thing that we can do to support each other is to do what the women in the Obama White House did. And so when someone says something, we can be like, Dina, thank you so much for raising that issue. I see that in my part of the world too, right? Or Mary Jo, I'm so glad you said that, because that reminds me of this. And so I think it's not just expecting someone else to jump in, but really thinking about how we can help each other in those situations.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that is a great coalition board. I'm honored to be on it with Mary Jo and some pretty amazing folks. So yeah. How might we as women contribute and use our voice when we have the opportunity to sit on a hiring committee or ask for input on others' promotions? Amanda?
I mean, I think there's probably a couple of things here. The first, obviously, is to advocate for diversity on the panel, on the pool of applicants, to really raise our voices and be asking those questions and making sure that we're getting as much diversity as possible. I also think it's really important to be actively disrupting bias, especially when we're talking about performance, with promotions and other spaces like that. And that can often be pretty uncomfortable, because bias is unconscious. It can be shared by folks that we really respect, that we like to work with, who have good intent. And so it can be hard to bring that up and to talk about it openly. And so one of the ways that I typically have that conversation, often it's one-on-one, you follow up with the folks offline, but it's sometimes to use humor, and to make it a little more comfortable, but to still make my point really clear that we can do better on this topic and that we should do better. And we've got to circle back and we've got to address some sort of systemic issue that
That's great. Randy.
Yes, I've had the great opportunity of being able to serve in this capacity, thinking about how we can make our workforce more diverse. And I've also been blessed to be part of a group that has really valued that. And in academia, as a lot of you know, there are a lot of young, more junior faculty who are female. And then as you move up the ranks, it becomes more and more male, and fewer females exist at the top, if you will. And so it's really important to achieve gender parity at all levels. And very fortunately, in our leadership structure, specifically at the institute where I work, the leader is very much a sponsor of women and of gender equity in the workplace. And I think that needs to be in place. Someone who is a sponsor, who is willing to consider specific processes around hiring that make it possible for women and underrepresented minorities to make it into, for example, the finalist pool. And one of the strategies that we've discussed on this particular committee that I think is applicable to including more female candidates as well as underrepresented minority candidates is to either require that one of the finalists be a female or underrepresented minority, or explain why you were not able to include one despite your best efforts. And I think that really makes the hiring committee think about the choices that they're making all along the way, if they'll have to justify it in the end. I also think that when you're hiring, it's important to have a rubric that's very objective around what you're looking for that person, for that position, because otherwise there's a lot of subjective choices that are made and our implicit biases can seep in. And so I think that having clear hiring processes that support diversity, as well as employing an objective rubric around the position that you're hiring for, can be really helpful in leveling the playing field.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Randy. Mary Jo.
Well, just along those same lines that Randy brought up, I think it's really important that no matter what your best intentions are, unless you have policy and procedure, you're just going to kind of fall back into your habits, because there's only so much we can do about changing ourselves. And so there's a great book by Irene Bonet that's called What Works, and it applies to women and really anybody you're trying to get more represented. And it's really around the academic research around what policies work and what procedures work. So if that's of interest to you, you can either, it doesn't have to be a big project, doesn't have to be HR, it can just be your team even as you look at incoming people and think about how you hire. But putting those things in place, I think, is what really gets you to move forward.
Yeah, that's great. Natalie, did you want to add something?
I do. I agree with all of those things. The other thing that I have the benefit of having the opportunity to do is that I just make it a condition of satisfaction of anything that I do. So as you move up in your career, people will want you to be on panels, or they'll want you to be on boards or hiring committees. Recently, I had the opportunity to co-chair a working group of the Civic Progress is doing a big planning effort right now. And I said, sure, as long as I get to pick some people that are on the committee. And that is another way kind of from the bottom up that it happens. And I think while it's great that women are doing it, it's way more powerful when men do it. So the number of men who have started saying, I will not be on that panel if it's all men, that is huge. And I really, really appreciate that. And so we all can, I think the point is we all have power in some ways. We just need to figure out where and how to deploy it.
That's fantastic. Again, I love all the perspectives that you all bring from the different sectors. So thank you. I'm getting ready to ask the final question. So I want to remind people to put questions in the chat box, and we've got quite a few great questions. So I'm anxious to get to those. On every panel that we've done this week, I've ended the discussion with this question, because I think it's important to kind of share what we're all going through right now in this challenging time. But COVID has changed our world professionally and personally. And how are each of you coping? And what advice do you have for other women to get through this pandemic? And I'll start with you, Natalie.
Yeah. I will be transparent. I am a divorced mother of a 5-year-old, and if I didn't share custody of her with someone else, I don't know what I would do. Having space and time to just have a little bit of quiet. I mean, literally after she leaves, as I'm like surveying the damage of the house, I sit on the couch, I put my weighted blanket on, and I stare at the wall. And I think if we can lock the bathroom door, if we can sit in the closet, even if you don't have children, turn off your phones and just find 5 minutes to just sit, I think it's difficult for me. I have to put my phone on the other side of the room, but that honestly has brought me more energy than I would have ever thought. So that's one thing that I'm working on.
Yeah, it's great. Mary Jo?
So I'm a huge fan of exercise as a form of therapy. And what I've really noticed this summer, and I'm starting to worry about the winter a little bit, is being outside as much as possible. And I even have it on my calendar now for a 15-minute walk in the middle of the day. And I just keep saying to myself, I have gloves, I have a coat, it doesn't really matter. And I find that when you go outside and actually look up, like don't look at the sidewalk, but look up at the trees or the sky or the clouds or whatever it is, and just sort of take those few minutes just to kind of re-energize. So I'm all for the outdoors. And if you can, go out on the weekends and walk for a long time or take a hike, but any kind of physical activity and outdoors, I think it's healing.
I agree. And I've become obsessed with the weather. So I even look ahead and go, okay, I get to walk on this day, and this day,
Yep.
So yeah, physical activity is fantastic. Amanda?
Well, I've been 100% working from home since March. We took time off for spring break with our kids and never went back. So I think one of the things for me was setting up a real workstation and trying to make it as ergonomically, adapted as possible. Because the aches and pains at my age set in pretty quickly. That was important. And then, actually for me, I find there's some pretty big upside to this working environment. I'm still working a lot of really long hours, but I don't have the commute. So I'm kind of less frantic, less harried. Like not taking calls at 7 a.m. in my car as I'm driving, not having to rush everywhere to be somewhere with the kids, and not having to travel internationally so much. Well, I'm not traveling at all. So I've tried to focus a lot on what's better about my life now. And I'm spending a lot more time with my 2 young children, and really focus on just maybe being a little bit quieter in my life, and think about what are those things that I want to institutionalize even when the world starts to shift back a little bit, that I kind of need to keep in place, because I've gotten some good perspective on maybe where I was really out of balance before.
Yeah, that's great. Randy?
I think Amanda's advice is great, and I'm going to try and follow that as well. One thing that I didn't do well is, like many households, I adopted a pandemic puppy, and that is not very relaxing. So as cute as they are, I don't know as if I would recommend that, although it does get me outside. So like Mary Jo said, it gets me outside at least twice a day for some long walks. Something that I've really seen as a silver lining in the pandemic is that I've been asked to fill different roles at work and really flex my skill set. And I've really leaned into that and enjoyed that. And it's filled my life with a lot of extra Zoom meetings, often back-to-back Zoom meetings all day long. And that I'm finding to be really exhausting. And I take some days every other week that are Zoom-free days, so that I don't have any meetings. I'm not out of office, I'm still working, but I'm getting the work done that normally I couldn't get done during the day if I'm on Zoom meetings all day. And so that's how I've tried to protect some of my work time, to make myself feel better about accomplishing the things that need to get done, while still maintaining kind of that frantic Zoom schedule other days of the week.
I think it's called Zoom fatigue is what they've said. And I know I try to stay out of my office on the weekends, just stay away from it. Now there's always the phone. Of course, we're all reading our emails on our phone, but I think the theme all week has been, from this question, kind of self-care, do what you have to do to kind of get that mind cleared and so forth. So, well, I'm going to go to the questions, and I'm going to start with Don's question. He's joined us. He's a guy, he's been joining us every day this week. He's wonderful. And I love his question. He says, this panel is made up of some very successful women in their fields. What would you say to yourself when you began your career that you have learned that helped you become this successful? So who would like to jump in?
I would tell myself to take more risks. I was very risk averse at the first part of my career. I loved school. I loved following the rules. And once I was finally out of school and into my first faculty job, I felt like I was still very routinized and not taking very many risks in terms of being innovative or thinking strategically or thinking about what's next. And stepping into a discomfort zone, I avoided that. And now I feel like I do it every day, if not every hour. I'm challenging myself to do something different. And so that's something that I currently enjoy, and I wish I would have started earlier and gotten more practice at, quite frankly.
Anyone else?
I would say, sorry, somebody else wants to go.
Go ahead, Mary Jo. I'll go after you.
Okay, so I was going to say, I think that for a lot of my career, I would try to gather the facts and make the decision myself and kind of work it all out in my head. And more recently, I've learned to say, okay, this is what I think and what I know, and then find a few key people who know enough about the situation, like, my industry or whatever that is, and say, okay, here's what I'm working through. What do you think? This is kind of the tact I'm taking. What am I missing? And I always come back with a much richer, better solution, whether it's a business solution or a work negotiation or whatever that is. And so I'm trying to incorporate that more in all the things that I do now, because I think that was a big miss earlier, just thinking you can solve it all inside your head.
Those are really good answers, and I would say ditto to both of them. And maybe my only add would be to listen more. I think I was so often trying to, I thought I had to come up with the answer, especially in my earliest leadership roles. I thought that being a leader meant having the answer. I would certainly go back and listen with intent, focus more on asking better questions, and really incorporating others' perspectives into my solutions.
Agree to all that. And just really quickly, to the extent that you can control your calendar, that's not always easy when you're, new in, but just what Randy was talking about, scheduling uninterrupted work time, if you can, is so important. And then I believe deeply in that if you're a whole person inside, you'll be a whole person at work. And so I highly encourage finding a great therapist and go as you need to go, right? Like once a week, once a month, whatever. Particularly if you're a woman in a field where there aren't a whole lot of us, that can be really, really important.
And have any of you ever used like a career coach that you found was helpful, Mary Jo?
Yeah, I've done it 3 different times. I'm actually doing it now. 2 different times with a different coach who's now retired. But when I had key career decision points to think through, and it gave me a structure to think through it with and held me accountable to moving it instead of just sort of wallowing. And so now I'm using it more as a coach as I work through this organization and another sounding board for my interactions with my board or my employees or that sort of thing. So I'm a huge fan. And they are half therapist, half coach. So that's always good.
Yeah, that's great.
And I've only had one experience with a career coach, but I actually like the idea of changing things up and getting different perspectives and perhaps different strategies and ways of propelling one forward through their career. And I was looking through the chat and I saw the question around long-term career planning. And my advice was going to be to get a career coach because they'll start getting you to think much beyond where you are right now. A lot of us are so buried in the day-to-day and what needs to be done, if not by the end of the week, by the end of the month, that it's really hard to look 2, 3, 4 years from now about where you would like to be. And it may be totally different from where you are now. And an outside view of that can really press and ask questions around, well, why do you feel that way? Why don't you think you're ready to make that type of a leap? And these are questions that, trust me, you won't ask yourself. So I just think it's really valuable to get that expert view from the outside on your career.
You can almost think of a career coach as an accountability coach, like they will make you get it done.
Well, and also there's a question. I think some people, going through this pandemic are looking at their careers or thinking if they want to change careers or just different things. And so pivoting into new sectors. And so the question is, how have you leveraged your skills while entering a different industry? So.
I mean, that's a long process. I saw that question from Jessica, and I think you do need a partner to help you with that. It's probably not enough just to have a friend help you with that or something like that, because it's a real process to sort through that and figure out how do you make that happen.
Yeah. Another question that I loved was, have you had to negotiate for work-life balance, and what was helpful and what was a hindrance?
So here's the thing. Hi, Melanie. Women cannot have it all. So let's all stop trying to set that as the goal. We're not going to have it all at the same time. I think that's the important thing, because I think we set ourselves up for this. Our marriages have to be perfect and our houses have to be clean and our children have to be happy and perfect. And we have to get a raise and so I think the first part is understanding what's really important to you right now. And then the second is understanding what are the conditions of satisfaction, what does success look like at your workplace? For some workplaces, I try really hard now that I have a team and I can have control. I try really hard to set, output or outcome benchmarks and say, like, generally this is when we work. And then I don't keep track of like when people are working. And unless they have an emergency, I'm not going to call them, right? I can do that because of my industry and my space. If your industry, like startups, isn't necessarily, tailored for that, then maybe at some point, if you have a conversation with your bosses and they're unwilling to move, it's time to think about another role or another industry that is a better fit. I was told really early on to think about the right job for right now. And that's something that I think about too. So don't be afraid to make a move if you need to. And I would also say, and then I'll stop talking. Don't be afraid to take a step back, right? Like, I think there's this sense that women have to climb the ladder, and if you like slide back, then you'll never get back. No, there is research that suggests that does have an impact on your earning potential, and it's your life, right? And so if family is really important, then take this step back.
So
I
I want to
get
weigh in and amplify a little something that Natalie said. So this whole thing, like, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time. You've heard that. But what I see people try to do is put these, I'll just say, crazy expectations on themselves that I'm not sure are really value add in their life. Whether it's what they're expecting to do with their kids, what they're expecting to do at work, what they're expecting to do with their partner. And I think you just need to look at all that. I mean, does your 4-year-old really care that you're at every soccer game? And I don't even know, these are terrible examples. Look, if you don't like to cook, figure it out, right? There's way amount of help out there and at all different price points. Like, you don't have to be super rich to, figure these things out. Is there really value add to your family that you do every load of laundry? Maybe not. So it's those kind of things though that I see people like, they put themselves on this hamster wheel. And they don't either ask for help at home or demand help at home or figure out how to get it. And they do the same thing at work. Like, they're the one that's always doing the extra project and always doing this. And when it's, they're kind of like reaching outside of where they really need to be, or they're not even asking a coworker or a subordinate to step up and do what they need to do. And so they're sometimes just their own worst enemy. And I've done this to myself. So it's not like I'm perfect about it, but it just pause and see what all those things are that you're taking up with these activities and where's the real value add. And if it's something that nobody can do but you, like put your kid to bed and read a book, then yes, you do those. But all that other stuff that other people can do in some way, shape, or form, get that off your plate.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I couldn't agree more with that last answer. I feel like I answer this question twice a week in various coaching conversations, and I've had a lot of opportunities in my career, and I have never said no to one because I was afraid of the work-life balance thing. Typically, I say, is this going to grow me? Is it going to grow my career? Am I really excited about it? And am I a little bit scared of it? And if I can check all those boxes, then I say I'll figure out the work-life balance thing. And, my husband and I we'll figure it out. We'll make it work. And that's usually the advice I give to other women. When my children were 3 and 5, I took my first global role. It had me traveling internationally 50% of the time, all around the world. It was huge and it was hard. And it was one of the most satisfying jobs I've ever had. And it literally made me a better person. And it was really, really hard on my family, but I don't regret it. It was really good for me, and it was a hard choice. But I think, again, it comes exactly back to what Mary Jo said. You figure out what's important.
Yeah.
And can I just add one more thing? And they've proven this isn't just me. I don't know where you are in your age trajectory, anybody on this call, but if you don't have a life partner and you're thinking about it, that is the most important decision of your life. And it needs to be somebody who respects that you want to do things like Amanda just talked about, and they have your back on that. And if they don't, you need to have that hard conversation and sort it out. And, I just see people, men and women, who make this choice of somebody that I don't feel fully respects them, and then they end up in a not very good situation at some future point. So you just should sort that out as soon as you can.
That's all amazing advice. And I will also say, I think appreciate where you are in your life. I can look back and think about the short time I took off to try to deal with two young kids. And I felt guilty the whole time. Oh, my career's going down the toilet. Oh, what am I going to do? No, it all worked out. But, and I should have, appreciated more of the time I had with my, kids when they were young. But so I think it all goes back to that female guilt, like who said, we think we can do it all. And you know what, maybe we can't. So, an interesting question here, kind of going back to communication skills and so forth, or negotiation is, we were talking about being in meetings, and how do you deal with perhaps someone, a man or even a woman, who continues to talk over you constantly?
Excuse me, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. Thank you, I'm speaking. That was amazing, by the way, not just because I thought it was funny, but I think we all in that moment saw ourselves, whether we've actually done that or whether we aspire to do that. And I think what it made possible was it gave us a little bit of a permission to do that. Now you have to think about power structures in the room, but this is one of those things that I have experienced, that when it happens, folks don't often realize they're doing it. And so if you either just say, can you please stop so I can finish my point in the middle of the meeting, or afterwards you say, I was in the process of speaking, or Randy was in the process of speaking, and I noticed that you spoke over her a lot. Oftentimes people don't notice it. There are some folks who just do, and then I just talk louder. And again, I work in a very specific sector, in a very specific sort of office environment. But I think it's okay to call it out. And this is the other thing, being a supervisor or a manager, please don't make the person in the room with the less power call it out. Please, as an ally, whether you are a man or a woman or you don't identify with any gender, please step in if you have the same or proximate power to that person, so that you don't have to put the other person in an awkward situation.
And Natalie, I'm
100%
so
agree.
glad that you brought up the power of the ally. I know that there's a comment in the chat around, other ways to be an ally. And I think that this is the perfect situation. I think that there's a potential for a man to interrupt that man and say, oh, Randy really has expertise on this topic. I'd like her to tell us about that, and just redirect the conversation. I think that that's a really important role for allies to have in that type of scenario, is to recognize when that's happening. And like you said, Natalie, it shouldn't be the one with the least power in the room. It helps when it's at least the equal power or a greater power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. And there's also been questions about negotiation, and talking about negotiations end up with compromises being made. From my experience, women have been expected to bend more than men in similar situations. And when is it appropriate to give up ground in these types of situations? Anyone?
It's hard to answer because every situation is so unique. I think what you want to assess, and I don't have a book off the top of my head on this, but there's dozens of negotiation books, or you can just go out on Wikipedia and read some stuff. But it's important for you to know going in, what is your walk away point? And your walk away point could just be, I'm walking away for today and there's another day. It could be, I'm walking away from this job, whatever it is. But it's good for you to understand where you are on that. And if you feel like you've been forced into a compromise that isn't fair, either isn't fair based on what you see your other colleagues do or your industry or something like that, then you have more information to go back and think through what are your next steps. Sometimes you do lose to win another day, and that's a very real thing. But I think it helps to go into the conversation, activity, whatever you want to say, with, where is my walk away from this? And again, that doesn't mean you walk away mad or anything, but you internally know, okay, this is what I wanted. I got 60% of it. I could live with that. or I can't. And so I think that's where the work starts on that.
Yeah. And I know that each of you, Mary Jo being an entrepreneur, raising money, raising funds, and Natalie, you brought up, being in the grant world and so forth. And so, how you negotiate those situations. I mean, do you have any advice for that?
I was talking with someone about this morning. So the nature of STEM-STL is we are a systems level organization. So we are trying to build clear, rigorous, and equitable STEM learning pathways in the region, which means we don't run programs, but we really care about how all of our out of school time programs work together in our schools and our employers. And so the work that we need to do needs to be about making that system work better together. And so the conversation that I was having is I'm going to have a conversation with a corporate donor, potential corporate donor tomorrow morning. And like many corporations, they typically fund very specific things with very discrete outcomes that count, we call it butts in seats, right? So they fund programs that will tell you how many kids were there and how many backpacks they gave out. And that's not what we do. And so I got the feedback from someone today that said, you're trying to tell them that you're a systems level organization and you're trying to kind of fit into what they do. And along the way, you're getting muddled. And so it was their advice. And frankly, I've given this advice to other people before. I just sort of forgot it, is to just truly be your authentic self. Because if you get that money, and let's be clear, it's not millions of dollars, but if you get that maybe 4-figure check from folks and you're changing your strategy, or you have to give in on what you think really is going to make change, you're going to regret taking that check. Or you're going to be distracted doing activities that don't actually advance your mission in the long term. So it's a risk, right? I mean, when you're staring down payroll, like I'm sure Mary Jo has, and like now I have to, it takes a minute to stop and to pause your impulse to just say, yeah, we're going to do this and this, and you'll give us money. And I think that if you can build a reputation on what it is that you most believe in, then you'll have an easier time raising money in the future. So it's
Great.
much more art than it is science. But that's what I think about when I'm evaluating prospective donor fits.
And I use that strategy too when I'm mentoring junior faculty. I really, I ask them to come up with kind of 3 buckets that they would like their work to fall into. And I ask them to use those kind of 3 pillars to build their personal brand. So much like what you were describing in terms of, what fits the mission and what doesn't. I said these 3 pillars will help you to know what to say yes to and what to say no to, but it will also help you provide that summary of who you are, that elevator pitch, so that you'll become really comfortable because you'll know that this is what I do, and then this falls out of that particular sphere. So I think that's really good advice just for people who recognize what their strengths are and want to grow their career in certain areas.
Yeah,
That's great.
Great advice. Well, I really hate for this discussion to come to an end, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and it's really been a great WISER week. We've had 3 days of amazing discussions and participation, so I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us. I certainly want to thank our sponsors. Like I said, in this challenging time, I was thrilled to get all the sponsors, but it's really showing, these organizations are showing how they support women in science and in research. So there's some information in the chat box. I thank you for everyone who's put names of books and different information in the chat box. But Randy, Mary Jo, Amanda, and Natalie, thank you so much for your time today, your honesty, your wisdom, your advice. And I'd like to thank everyone for being a part of WISER Week. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.